The planet had no name anymore. Names were for places that expected visitors, for maps that still mattered. This world had been catalogued once, marked with a sterile alphanumeric code in a colonial database that no longer existed. Now, it was simply here, a dead sphere drifting around a dim red star, its surface scoured by radiation storms and ancient impacts, its sky the color of rusted iron. The wind never truly stopped. It moved across the plains in low, endless moans, dragging powdered stone along the ground, whispering through the skeletons of shattered antennae and collapsed habitats. The sound was constant, a breath drawn by something too large to ever be seen. Over decades, it had carved shallow dunes against the remains of human ambition. At the center of that desolation stood a single structure still intact, a habitat dome, reinforced far beyond necessity. Its transparent shell had long since gone opaque from microfractures and dust abrasion, turning the world outside into a permanent twilight. Inside, dim lights glowed on a strict energy schedule, rationed down to the minute. Within that dome lived the last human on the planet. His name was Elias Mercer. He was 68 years old by Earth calendars, older by the gravity of this world, which pulled just a fraction harder than his bones had been designed to bear. His hair was white now, cropped close to his scalp. His hands shook sometimes when he thought about it too much. His joints ached in the long cold nights when the star dipped below the horizon and the temperature plummeted fast enough to frost the inside of the dome. Elias sat alone at a narrow metal table, illuminated by a single overhead strip, eating a meal that tasted like nothing: protein paste, reconstituted starch, vitamin slurry. He chewed slowly, not because he enjoyed it, but because chewing gave structure to time. Swallowing marked progress. It reminded him that minutes were still passing, that his heart still beat, that he remained, by the loosest definition, alive. Around him, the habitat hummed. Life support systems whispered through old ducts. The recycler cycled water that had passed through his body more times than he cared to count. A cracked monitor on the far wall displayed atmospheric pressure, radiation levels, and structural integrity, numbers he checked every day, even though they never changed. Outside the dome, nothing lived. No plants, no insects, no microbes detectable by even the most sensitive scanners. The planet had been sterilized long before humanity arrived, scoured clean by a cosmic event that stripped away oceans and atmosphere in a geological heartbeat. When the colony ship Aurora's Reach had landed here 40 years ago, optimism had still been a currency humans believed in. They had come chasing minerals buried deep beneath the crust. Rare isotopes needed to fuel faster than light drives. The surveys had promised profit. The engineers had promised safety. The politicians had promised permanence. They were all wrong. The planet's crust was unstable. Radiation pockets bloomed without warning. The mining shafts collapsed one by one, and then the storms came. Charged particle events that overwhelmed shielding and fried electronics across kilometers of terrain. Evacuation had been chaotic. The Aurora's Reach never made it off the ground. Elias remembered the sky burning green as the ship's reactor went critical. He remembered the sound, like the world itself tearing apart. He remembered running, dragging wounded colleagues across broken ground, screaming into a comm unit that only returned static. He remembered being sealed inside the habitat while the evacuation alarms wailed outside. He remembered the silence afterward. That had been 32 years ago. Since then, no rescue ship had come. No signal had ever answered his own automated distress beacons, which still broadcast on repeat, powered by a reactor designed to last centuries. This is Elias Mercer. Last known survivor of Outpost Theta 9, the recording said, over and over, requesting extraction, requesting confirmation of human presence, if received. He had stopped listening to the rest. Over time, Elias learned the rhythm of isolation. He learned how many steps it took to cross the dome, how long the star took to rise and set, how much memory he could revisit before it began to hurt too much. He spoke aloud sometimes, not because he expected an answer, but because silence had weight. It pressed in on his thoughts, made them echo too loudly. He talked to the machines, he talked to the wind beyond the dome, he talked to ghosts. And then one day he heard something new. It happened during the long dusk, when the sky dimmed into a bruised purple and the winds howled louder than usual. Elias was performing his nightly systems check, moving through the narrow corridor that led toward the airlock. That was when the sound came. A knock. Not a vibration. Not the groan of metal under stress. Not the random percussion of debris striking the dome. A knock. 3 sharp impacts, spaced deliberately apart. Elias froze. For a moment, his mind rejected the sound outright. The brain, after decades of loneliness, grows cautious with hope. It treats anomalies as threats, not because they are dangerous, but because disappointment hurts more. He stood there, one hand resting on the wall, listening. The wind roared outside, nothing else. His heart began to race, a heavy pounding in his chest that made his breath hitch. Hallucination, he whispered to himself. His voice sounded strange, unused. Auditory echo, pressure shift. Then it came again. 3 knocks, clear, intentional. This time, closer, directly against the airlock hatch. Elias staggered backward, as if struck. No, he breathed. No, 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 no. His hands shook violently now as he activated the internal cameras. The display flickered, lines of static crawling across the cracked screen before stabilizing. The airlock exterior camera came online. At first, he saw nothing but dust and darkness. Then 3 shapes stepped into view. They were tall, taller than any human he had ever known. Their bodies were wrapped in layered armor that blended organic curves with metallic sheen, designed not for decoration, but for movement. Their legs bent differently than his, built for strength and speed. Their faces, visible through partially retracted helmets, were unmistakably alien. Angular features, forward-facing eyes that glowed faintly gold in the low light, skin patterned with subtle markings that caught the dim starlight. They stood there calmly, framed by the dead world behind them. 3 huntresses. Elias's breath came in shallow gasps. His vision tunneled. 30 years of certainty that he was alone, that humanity was gone, fractured in an instant. One of the figures stepped forward. She raised a hand, clawed fingers curling into a gentle fist, and knocked once more against the hatch. Then, through the external speaker system, a voice spoke. The translator lagged for half a second before resolving the sound into words. Elias Mercer, the voice said, low and resonant, unmistakably female. We have traveled far to find you. His knees buckled. He collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold metal floor, staring at the screen as if it might dissolve. How? He whispered. How do you know my name? There was a pause. Then the voice replied, softer now. We know many things about you, she said. Some of them you do not yet know yourself. Elias laughed then, a brittle, broken sound that echoed down the corridor. I'm dead, he muttered. This is it. Brain finally snapped. The figure tilted her head, studying the camera. If this were a vision, she said carefully, it would not cast shadows. Behind her, the other 2 shifted slightly. Dust swirled around their feet. The light from the dying star glinted off their armor. They were real. Elias forced himself to stand. With shaking hands, he initiated the airlock sequence. Warning lights flared. The system protested. Its protocols had not been triggered by external visitors in decades, but eventually, ancient mechanisms complied. The outer hatch opened. The wind screamed into the chamber, carrying fine grit and cold that cut through insulation like knives. The three figures stepped inside without hesitation, their armor sealing seamlessly as the hatch closed behind them. The airlock pressurized. When the inner door slid open, Elias stood waiting, leaning heavily on the wall for support. Up close, they were even more imposing. The lead huntress removed her helmet fully, revealing a face both alien and unsettlingly expressive. Her eyes held intelligence, patience, and something else, something almost like reverence. She looked at him as one might look at a long-lost ancestor. "Hello, father," she said. The words struck him harder than any blow. "I'm sorry," Elias said faintly. "You must have the wrong." "You are Elias Mercer," she interrupted gently. "Yes," he said. "But I don't." "You lived on this world for 32 years alone," she continued. "You sent distress signals that echoed through dead space long after your species believed itself extinct." Elias stared at her. "Extinct?" She nodded slowly. "The last human cities fell centuries ago," she said. "The stars burned your kind away through war, entropy, and fear, but your signal remained." A voice in the dark. His chest tightened. "Centuries. 32 years here had felt like a lifetime. To the galaxy, it had been nothing." "Then why are you here?" he asked. The huntress glanced at the others, then back to him. "Because," she said, "we are your children." Silence fell like a gravity well. Elias shook his head. "That's not possible. There was no one left. No women, no—" "You did not create us in the way your species once did," she said. "You created us in the only way you could." She gestured toward the far end of the habitat. "The signal you sent did more than call for rescue," she said. "It carried data, genetic markers, neural patterns, emotional imprints." Elias's thoughts raced. His distress beacon had been more than a call for help. It had been a repository, a last archive of humanity, encoded with biological and psychological data in case some future intelligence found it. A failsafe. "You found it," he whispered. "We did," she said, and we answered. They followed him deeper into the habitat as she spoke, her voice filling the narrow corridors with meaning he had never imagined possible. Her people, the Aurelian conquered, were hunters by necessity, survivors of a galaxy that rewarded adaptation and punished stagnation. When they found his signal drifting through the void, they did not hear weakness. They heard defiance, a single human refusing to disappear quietly. Using advanced bioengineering and adaptive evolution, they had used his data as a template, not to recreate humans, but to preserve what made them human. Curiosity, emotional depth, moral conflict, the ability to care even when it hurt. They had become something new, something born of him. In the central chamber of the habitat, Elias sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "I never knew," he said. "I thought I was just screaming into the dark." The huntress knelt before him, lowering herself so her eyes met his. "Your voice taught us what it meant to endure," she said. "We crossed star systems guided by your pain and your hope. We came not to take you, but to bring you home." "Home?" he echoed. She smiled, a small, careful expression. "To the future," she said. The choice lay before him, heavy and absolute. Remain here, die as the last unaltered human on a forgotten world. Or go with them, be changed, extended, become something more than he had ever imagined. neither fully human nor entirely alien, but a bridge between what was lost and what might yet be. Elias closed his eyes. He thought of the wind, the silence, the endless years. He thought of the knock. When he opened his eyes again, there were tears on his cheeks. "I'm tired of being alone," he said. The huntress rose and offered her hand. "Then come," she said softly. "Meet your children." As they stepped out into the dying light of the planet, the wind seemed quieter somehow. Above them, stars waited. And for the first time in centuries, humanity moved forward again, carried not by ships, but by legacy.